Diyos. Maraming salamat po sa buhay at lakas na aming taglay, sa liwanag ng kaisipan at sa pagkakataong maipagpatuloy ang pag-aaral ng mga kabataan. Gabayan mo po ang bawat isa sa amin. Anuman ang bahagi na nagagampanan, naway maging maayos at matagumpay ang pagtuturo at pag-aaral na aming gagawin sa araw na ito. Patawarin mo po kami sa aming mga pagkulang at pagkakasala. At sa aming paggawa, ikaw po ang aming makasama. Amen.
Hello once again, grade 12 Valenzuelanos. Welcome to the third learning session via live stream for 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world. I am Jasper and I will be your live stream teacher. Make sure that you have with you your learning packet, your notebook, and your ball pen. Please take down notes during our live stream sessions. Before we indulge ourselves with a fruitful lesson for today, let me show you a picture of a famous weekend TV show in the years 2000 onwards. Are you familiar with Magandang Gabi Bayan with Noli De Castro? If you are, kindly write on the comment box what you remember when you see this picture. You know, I have doubts if you are familiar with this, so I prepared another picture for you. How about this man? Do you know him? If you do, please write his name on the comment box. If your answer is Ed Caluwag, then you are correct. Who is Ed Caluwag? What is his participation in the weekend TV show Kapuso Mo, Jessica Soho? What stories will be involved if Ed Caluwag is around? Comment your answers. You are correct if you think that Ed Caluwag is first a paranormal expert and second that when he's around, viewers should expect for spooky stories that really send chills to the bones. One would always expect that as days run towards or closer to November, these shows tend to feature more of stories about urban legends, maligno, ghosts, and other unbelievable but terrifying stories we don't want, of course, to hear before bedtime. How about a tweet or shared post like this? Can you look at this shared post? Let me read it for you. There was a child who claimed that he has third eye. His classmates thought he was crazy because he is always smiling and laughing on his way to school. One day, his teacher asked him, "Why are you happy on your way here?" He responded, "Hinahatid po kasi ako ni Papa." Spooky, right? How come they don't see the child's father? If this did not send you some chills, let's see about this one. Midnight, I got a passenger. Nothing unusual. I helped her strap on the helmet, got on, and went on our way. We arrived safe and sound, then she gives me back the helmet as she joyfully walks away. In my hand was the helmet, with her head still intact. You can't just imagine if someone who gets scared easily read this at the middle of the night. That might have been really frightening. While some find this scary, I think that others, some of us, are highly tolerant for these kinds of stories. We would even say, well, that's just a story. Well, guess what? These are really stories. But compared to the stories that you have read in your junior high school or in one of your classes, this is quite different, especially in length. How would you describe the length of the stories that we have presented a while ago? Comment your answers on the comment box. Correct. This one is kind of shorter than the conventional short story that you read. One would also notice that both stories elicit fear from the readers and use the hashtag Manila Encounters before they're posted. These stories are actually part of the other stories that can be found under the hashtag Manila Encounters. This hashtag, began as a role-playing game or RPG exercise to crowdsource or get fictional stories from those who live in the outskirts of Metro Manila. These stories mix legends, superstitions, and strange beliefs and are posted on Twitter and Reddit. Given the length of this piece, can we consider it a literary genre? What do you think is the literary genre we can associate with this kind of fiction? Comment your answers on the comment box. I'm gonna wait for your answers. How can we say, or how do we describe this as a literary genre? What literary genre is connected with these kinds of stories? If your answer is flash fiction, then you are correct. These kinds of flash fiction, however, are not similar with the ones published on paper. Since they are posted electronically or on social networking sites, we may label them as products of microliterature, one of the media used to present 21st century literature. Given the emergence of this form, one may actually ask, are there emerging literary genres in the 21st century? Did we add to the recognized literary genres that we know? These are probably some of the questions that you have on your mind right now, but don't worry, for we will try to answer those questions by conducting a teaching and learning session focused on highlighting the following targets. Let's see our objectives for today. Number 1, define genre. 2, differentiate literary genres based on literary technique from the ones based on theme and content. And lastly, understand the role of century literature and how literature is written through discussion of representative texts. Let us begin with the definition of genre. Just like what we usually do, let's look first at the word synonymous to the word genre. We have the following words: category, kind, and group. Genre formally means a category of artistic composition, as in music or literature, characterized by similarities in form, style, or subject matter. Given this definition, we would understand that genre simply refers to the compositions grouped together because of a particular similarity. Using this definition, we would also understand that literary genre refers to category, kind, or group of literary texts according to form, style, or subject matter. Note that literary pieces may be classified according to number 1, form, and number 2, subject matter. Basically, what we're trying to paint here is that literature can be classified, grouped, or categorized based on form or how they are written, and on the subject matter or content. Looking at how literature is written means looking at literary technique or method used by the writer to present the literary elements and convey the theme. On the other hand, when we talk of literary works grouped together according to the content or subject matter, we mean to say literary pieces may be grouped according to the theme or the underlying message that the writer wants to get across. Let us focus first on the literary genre based on how literature is written and on the writer's literary technique. Under this, we have 3 genres. We have prose, poetry, and drama. Under prose and poetry, there are other several genres according to form and content. While under drama, there are other several genres according to content that somehow continues or coincides rather with that of fiction, which is under prose. My dear students, let's have prose. Prose is derived from the Latin word prosa, which literally means straightforward. It is like talking to someone in a straightforward manner and not in a sing-song or poetic way. Prose is made up of complete sentences and constitute paragraphs in a narrative form. In a nutshell, the message of the literary piece when we are writing prose is conveyed using a story that may be factual or fictional and is written using sentences, not lines, in the development of the story. Prose is even divided into two other genres. We have fiction and non-fiction. Fiction is derived from the Latin word fictum, which means created. Can you recall the fairy tale or other stories that your mother or grandmother used to tell you about animals, monsters, even human beings that existed in faraway countries or in primordial times? These are fictional narratives. Fiction is a story or setting that is derived from imagination. In other words, these are not based strictly on history or facts. Fiction can be expressed in a variety of forms. We have novels, novellas or shorter versions of novels, fables, myths, short stories, legends, folklore, flash fiction, films, video games, anime, manga, you're familiar with that, radio and television programs, and even comic books like Avenger series. Let us look at one genre under prose, the novel. This refers to a lengthy literary piece of writing read over a period of days. It involves major and minor characters, subplots, multiple conflicts, point of view, actions, thoughts, time periods, and even twists. Note that a novel should be lengthy for a reason. This length is due to the crafting and recrafting of the main story using different subcategories and subplots that unfold together with the introduction of new characters in the passage of time. Let us see two examples of novels, one published in 1916 and another one in 2011. In the presentation, our presentation of these two novels, we likewise aim to differentiate how a certain theme is presented. Our first novel is A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. Who among you or who among here are kids who were raised in the church? Raise your hand. Are you pressured because your family expects a lot from you? If you are, then you can possibly relate with Stephen Daedalus, the protagonist of our novel. It is a story of a boy growing up in Ireland at the end of the 19th century England as he gradually decides to cast off all his social, familial, and religious constraints to live a life devoted to the art of writing. As a young boy, Stephen's Catholic faith and Irish nationality heavily influenced him. He even attends a strict religious boarding school. As the novel progresses, he is introduced to vices and realities of the world and even falls in love and grows as a human being. Stephen resolved to live his life to the fullest and vows not to be constrained by the boundaries of his family, his nation, and his religion. He intended to liberate himself from all expectations from friends and family. Like his namesake, the mythical Daedalus, Stephen hopes to build himself wings on which he can fly above all obstacles and achieve a life as the artist or an artist. In this novel, we see how Stephen's journey as a young man led him to the creation of his own identity. This same theme, the creation, if not discovery of one's identity, is also the subject matter of our contemporary trilogy. Looking at this picture, can you guess the trilogy that we're talking about here? Are you familiar with these five factions? What trilogy popularized these factions? If your answer is Divergent or the Divergent trilogy by Veronica Roth, then you are correct. From the beginning of this book, it's clear that the society in Divergent has placed unrealistic limits on its members' identities. The segregation of different personality traits or types into different factions has consequences on both the group and the individual level. By forcing every person into factions, focus on a single personality trait. The government discouraged personal growth that normally takes place throughout a person's life. For everyone in Trish's society, identity is locked at the age of 16 and change. Trish thinks that, or thinks she must choose whether to be brave or selfless, because neither the choosing ceremony in the novel nor faction system acknowledges the possibility that she may be both. In the end, Trish's and Tobias's divergence rests in their willingness to acknowledge their own complexity, even when doing so is personally painful or challenges faction unity. Similar to Joyce's novel a while ago, this trilogy looks at teenagers who struggle to create their own identity. At the end, or in the end, though the society and even our own families dictate on who we are, we end up creating an identity for ourselves. Notice that these two novels are two different generations or are from different generations and yet able to capture the same theme, which is about identity. This observation informs us that the struggles of the 20th century are still felt in the 21st century. There may be other emerging themes in the 21st century literature, but looking at these two novels, we are sure that the themes of the past are still the themes of today. What differs is only the way that we convey these themes. Let's stop for a while or our discussion of the 21st century themes so that we may proceed to the next conventional genre under fiction. This time we have short story. This literary genre presents the story of one particular character in a single plot, which may feature minor characters. Unlike the novel, short stories are meant to be read in a single sitting. Let us see some short stories of the 20th century Philippines or literary pieces published from 1900s to 1999. First, we have the short story The Visitation of the Gods by Hilda Fernando, which talks of the common scenes in a public school when there is an announced visit from the supervisors. The gods here refer to the visitors from the higher offices who evaluate the condition of the school. In the story, we see that or how the school will prepare only if these kinds of events occur. The school administrators hide the school's imperfections and would only talk of things that would mark an impression on the group of evaluators. I don't know if you have once seen your school, but it's interesting to note that even in the past, these things happen. This tells us of how idealistic and people pleasers Filipinos are. Another short story, this time, Footnote to Youth by Jose Garcia Villa, talks of Dodong, the protagonist, who asserts his supposed maturity and married Taeyang at the age of 17. He thinks they're old enough to take on this responsibility, but after they had several children, they both bemoaned the disillusion of their youth and the dreams that came along with it. At the end, Dodong's son, Blas, approaches his father wanting to marry about the same age, even though Dodong doesn't want Blas to make this same mistake as he did. However, history ends up repeating itself. In this short story, we see how immature decisions win us over as youngsters. Footnote meaning source or reference, we can say that this short story serves as a material that teaches us about the dangers of immature decisions. Let us have another one, this time about a chicken being a hen or a rooster. Alejandro Rosas' My Brother's Peculiar Chicken. At first reading, you may think that this is something simply about the dilemma of the characters, about the true sex of the said chicken. But using gender studies, we see that these characters seem to be the society that dictates what a male or female should be. These three short stories of the 20th century have the themes of the Filipino idealism, dangers of immature decisions, and of course, gender. These short stories, on the other hand, which were written in the 21st century, seem to convey a different set of themes. Here we have the story entitled Yaya by Marguerite Alcarazan de Leon that features the life of a housemaid in the Philippines. We likewise have Preludes by Daryl Delgado, which explores how the Filipino society looks at women infidelity, that just like other cultures, men and women are not and will never be the same in the issue of infidelity. And of course, we have Martinez by Ana Felicia Sanchez that discusses the social cultural context pertaining to Filipino folklore and superstitions. At this point, I'd like you to think whether or not the themes of the short stories in the 20th century have differences with the short stories written in the 21st century. Given this small number of representative texts, however, I don't think that we can infer something about them. But after the live stream session, think of other literary pieces or short stories you have read in junior high school. Are there differences in the themes between the ones written in the past and the ones which were written now in our milieu? Alright, you need to take note of that question. Now let us proceed with other genres under fiction. Here we have fables, a narrative form which usually features animals that behave and speak as human beings. It is told in order to highlight human follies and weaknesses. A moral or lesson for behavior is woven into the story and often explicitly formulated at the end. How is this different from a parable? Before we look at the description of a parable, I'd like you to think of some differences. Can you comment your answers? How is a fable from a parable? Alright. You see, both presents a moral or a lesson at the end. But a parable would use humans as characters, while fables would use animals as the ones doing actions humans usually do. An example of a parable is the parable of the prodigal son in the Bible, which tells of a wayward son his inheritance but returns home to find that his father forgives him. Remember our Manila encounters a while ago? Again, in terms of form, we can say that they are examples of flash fiction. These works used to be referred to as short stories until around the turn of the century, which was on the year 2000, when the term flash fiction became the norm, okay? The norm that was used to represent these stories. Let us look at another example. Let us read this flash fiction by yours truly. It is entitled The Day She Woke Up. Let's read. Flashes of rays opened her eyes. A bright mirage met her and faded into her room's blue ceiling. She felt relieved that she never wanted to look on any other thing around her. She deceives herself. Droplets of giving her eyes a fury crown of hate and pity for herself. She turned to his letter, reads it, rereads it, until she felt a smirk was loose. Her lips crumple, then they go back, just as when the last drop of tear fell, seeing not the letter, but insight. What does this flash fiction refer to? You see, it presents this character who must have had a heartbreak. She denies that she still hurt at first and does not miss anyone, but then turns to the letter that must have been the last memory she was left with. Towards the end, we see how fleeting our emotions are. Sadness eventually dissolves until what is left, or what you can see, is not only the memory of the person who left you, but also the lesson. There are other forms of fiction, and I urge you to read about them. For now, let us proceed with non-fiction. The literary pieces under this genre are narratives about actual events. Events in life weaved into or using literary techniques used in writing fiction. Again, the stories here are real events that were written creatively. We also add here the essay as a piece of literature. It refers to a critical literary composition that presents the writer's arguments on one particular issue or subject. What are the different literary forms under nonfiction? We have biography, autobiography, and memoirs. A biography, also called a bio, is a nonfiction piece of work giving an objective account of the person's life. Biographies include the details of key events that shape the subject's life and information about their birthplace, education, work, and relationships. Biographers use a number of research sources including interviews, letters, diaries, photographs, essays, reference books, and newspapers. An autobiography, on the other hand, is the story of a person's life written by that person. Because the author is also the main character, autobiographies are written in the first person. The purpose of an autobiography is to portray the life experience of the author. Therefore, most autobiographies are written later in the subject's life. Memoir comes from the French word mémoire, meaning memory or reminiscence. Similar to an autobiography, a memoir is the story of a person's life written by the difference between a memoir and an autobiography focuses on establishing an emotional connection rather than presenting the facts around their life. Again, the first major genre of literature, according to how it is written, is prose. Now let us have poetry. Poetry uses aesthetic and rhythmic qualities of language to evoke meanings. It is set in verse and has meter or rhyme with focus based on syllable counts, musicality, and delineation, which runs from one end of the page to the other. Poetry is typically written in lines and blocks of lines known as stanzas. There are various genres under poetry. We have lyric poetry, ballad, epic, ode, sonnet, elegy, spoken poetry, tanag, and other forms you may have encountered before. Let's have one particular example of poetry. Let's have lyric poetry. A short song like having is really subjective in nature and meaning. Yeah, and it's also meant to be sung. Alright, so the word lyric is actually derived from the Greek word lyre, which means musical instrument. An example of this would be a rose by Robert and is meant to be sung aloud. It describes the speaker's deep love for his or her beloved and promises that this love will last longer than human life and even the planet life itself, remaining fresh and constant forever. Aside from lyric poetry, we have the sonnet. It is a short poem written in 14 lines using iambic pentameter. This is an example of a Shakespearean sonnet. As you can see, it is actually divided into 3 quatrains, meaning to say that each stanza has 4 lines and one couplet at the end of or a 2-liner stanza. Sonnet 116 talks of the realities of love. It ends with the conviction that if all things mentioned in the first 3 quatrains are all nonsense, then the persona who claims to have known love would not have loved anymore, and no one would not have love at all. This one, on the other hand, is a Petrarchan sonnet about Laura. It should be divided stay or a 6-liner stanza and an octave or an 8-liner stanza. Now let's have epics. Epics are also considered part of poetry. It is a long narrative poem having heroic qualities. Epics deal with grand as well as serious subject in an elevated style. They generally deal with a well-known story and is centered around a heroic or divine figure on whose actions depend the fate of a tribe or nation. In this example, we see the lines from the epic Iliad by Homer. Here you'll notice that the epic was not actually written in prose, but in verse. A clear indication that epics are considered poems. Or another form of poetry is the tanaga. It is an indigenous type of Filipino poem that is used traditionally in the Tagalog language. The modern tanaga still uses the 777 syllable count. An example of this can be read in your learning packets. Check if the tanaga there really has a 7-syllable count in each line. Of all the forms of poetry, I believe this is something that everyone is familiar with. This is the spoken poetry. Though recitation of lines has already occurred in days of yore, we still love to hear this performance poetry. It is actually a continuation of the ancient oral artistic tradition that started in the late 20th century and focuses on the aesthetic recitation and wordplay such as the performance live intonation and voice inflection. Now, we're done explaining prose and poetry. Let us look at drama. Drama simply refers to literature intended for performance, according to Kier 1980. The lines written for this genre are in dialogue form. What are some of the earliest examples of drama? In the past, the only drama that the audience may watch is a tragedy. This drama presents the downfall of a highly revered person because of his amartia or fatal flaw. According to Aristotle, a good tragedy must be so tragic that it evokes the strongest and repressed emotions on the part of the audience. He called this process as catharsis or emotional purgation, the feeling of being relieved after seeing a tragic drama or in our time after watching a tragic film or teleserye. This would be your famous Oedipus Rex, which is about Oedipus who unknowingly killed his father and married his own mother. What could have been more tragic than him or than this story? Do you know any other tragic teleserye on TV? If there is more tragic than this, comment that particular name of the TV teleserye below. Another example of drama is your favorite Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, and as a representative of Philippine literature, The New Yorker in Tondo by Marcelino Agana Jr. The literary text we have discussed so far was meant to explain the genres according to literary techniques used or literary form which have revolved around those which were published in the 20th century. What makes them different from the text written in the 21st century? For starters, let's be clear that the 21st century refers to the year 2000 onwards. In this century, technology has introduced us a variety of ways to publicize literature. Unlike in the past, where the only medium of publication is paper publication, now we know we can publish without using a paper. One can actually post a poem or a story on a website which is accessible to all through the internet. From innovations in recognized forms such as the novel, poem, play, and short story to developments in blogging, digital writings, hypertext, new media, and creative writing. Before we proceed, I'd like to note that what has differed in the 21st century is the media used to publish, not really the literary genres that were already established since the time we humans have known how to write. What would make it distinguishable from the previous centuries of writing would be the subject matter or the themes that the writers of today have the freedom to explore deeper. In today's globalized, technology-mediated society, literature can be used to explore national, ethnic, linguistic, and social-political issues of today. Like the representative text that we will explore on our succeeding meetings, 21st century literature seems to focus on individual nations' diversity, writers' international and diasporic identities, and national literary and linguistic groups' unequal representation. Going back to the media of publication, we see a term used to actually refer to the body of short articles and publications shared online, and that is micro-literature. Micro-literature can be categorized into textual, or textula rather, hyper-poetry, and Literature. Textula, as presented on your learning packets, refer to a blend of the English words text and the Filipino word tula, which means poem in English. Basically, it is a poem sent using the text messaging app on your phone. This poem, let's look at this, sent as a text message, for example, is an example of textula. Let's read it. Bayang kinagisnan ko, minamahal kong tunay. Nakatatak sa puso hanggang ako'y mamatay. Ang ating kayamanan, ang kagandahang asal. Pagiging makabayan, ating pinapairal. Tila siyang ina ko, iniibig kong wagas, nag-iisa sa mundo, ang bansang Pilipinas. Very patriotic, right? What do you think? There is actually another textula on your learning packet. After this learning session, spend time in reading that one. Another form of microliterature is the hyperpoetry or poem shared using the application Instagram. Who among you have Instagram here? Right? Yes, if you have an Instagram account. Aside from being it a hyperpoetry, there is another name for that. And that is actually Instapoetry. Don't just share pictures on your Instagram account. Share pictures of poems. Just like this. Let's look at an example. Women of Color by Rupi Kaur. Let me read it for you. Our backs tell stories no books have the spine to carry. A very short poem indeed, but its conciseness did not miss to hit the issue of racial discrimination. How about this Insta poetry? I know everyone can relate with this. The ones who are the marupok can relate. Can you tag your classmates who are considered marupok? Alright, let me read this poem for you. Let's look at this. If fairy tales have taught us anything, it's that we fall in love with short stories the most. Isn't it so accurate that every time you meet your crush, you think that some way along the hallway, he or she might be interested in you. But at the end of your daydreaming, you realize your thoughts are just fantasy. You see, happy endings do not happen because we are the happy endings of our own self. Textula, Insta poetry. Now, let's have literature or literary use of the microblogging service on Twitter to share various literary genres. If you're familiar with the stories that are in the form of a thread, then you must have seen a literature before. Here is an example of a created nonfiction which is narrated as a thread in Twitter. It is about the love story of two male soldiers during World War II. The story began when the tourist who spent time in the cemetery in Romania noticed that one of the tombs, alright, the one that you can see on the picture, has two names on it, Emil and Mueller. The tourist then explored why of all the tombs, this is the only tomb that has two names on it. You see, it's only now that everyone seems to be tolerable with Sarawat and Tain, right, in the series together. In the past, the patriarchal society has limited our ways of thinking about love. The most striking line in one of the journals the tourists found here was this line. We have been taught that ours was not love, but I realized that it was. You may explore this on Facebook if you want to know more about the whole story. Again, for the 21st century, we have the following media of publication. We have the textula, the hyperpoetry, and the literature. In the 21st century, some themes have emerged also or re-emerged from the past. What are these themes? We have fantasy, horror, science fiction, supernatural stories, dystopian, alternate history, apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, and superhero stories as themes. These themes are also called content of speculative fiction or fictional stories about what could happen next. Let us have some examples. First, we have fantasy or stories which are actually product of imagination and are especially things that are improbable or impossible to happen. An example would be this K-drama Netflix series here. What is the title of this K-drama? Can you guess the title of this K-drama? Write your answer on the comment box. You're correct. It's The King Eternal Monarch. Here we are introduced to the concept of time traveling and the existence of a parallel world where every one of us has a counterpart. Science fiction or sci-fi is another example of speculative fiction. It is fiction based on imagined future scientific or technological advances. An example of a sci-fi film would be this. It's actually a combination of sci-fi and fantasy. Can you guess the movie based on what you see here? How about this one? How about the next picture? Alright, what's the name of this character? Alright, it's King T'Challa of Wakanda in the movie Black Panther. In this film, we are introduced to the technological advances of the country, the fictional country Wakanda, which became technologically advanced because of the possession of the strongest but fictional metal. This is fictional, the strongest metal on Earth, the vibranium. Aside from the previous two examples, we likewise have the dystopian novels, which feature fictional stories that take place in a highly undesirable society, often plagued with strict control, violence, chaos, brainwashing, and negative elements. An example of a dystopian novel is this, The Maze Runner. Here, the plot revolves around a group of people who were placed under an experiment in order to develop a cure for the disease caused by extreme rays of the sun. Different from speculative literature, chick literature or chick lit, on the other hand, contains narratives, the issues of modern womanhood, from relationship to female friendships to matters in the workplace, mostly about women. Examples of this would be the following books you can see on the screen right now. The Devil Wears Prada and the other ones that you can see. With the growth of these speculative novels and other literary pieces that dig deeper onto the themes that we have already seen in the past centuries, we hope to see 21st century literature as a means to better understand what it means to be human. Before we end the learning session for today, let us answer these questions for mastery. Number 1. What do we mean by the term literary genre? Comment your answers on the comment box below. If your answer is category, kind, or group of literary texts according to form, style, or subject matter, then you are correct. Now, let's have the second question. What are the two literary genres according to the writer's literary, how literature is written? Go ahead, comment your answers. Alright, prose and poetry. Well, let's include also drama. Third question. Cite various literary genres according to content. We have said or we have talked about literary genres a while ago according to content. Write them down on our comment box. Let me give you a clue. Okay, how about dystopian novels? That is a literary genre according to content. Remember to differentiate the literary genre according to how literature is written from the literary genre according to the content. Those are two different. Alright, so we have several of them. I know that you have answered them correctly on the comment box. Let's have another question. What are the different modes of publication introduced in the 21st century? We have discussed that a while ago. So publication. Okay, we have microliterature, textula, hyperpoetry, instapoetry, and literature. Last question. Can you cite some of the emerging themes in the 21st century that we may use as subject matters of the literary texts? For example, we're going to write a short story. What best theme, the 21st century theme, as the subject matter of this literary text? Example, Say, for example, identity crisis among teenagers. That could be a subject matter for a particular literary text. What other themes can we use? Themes that are emerging or that are relevant or evident in the 21st century. All right, I love to see those comments. Yeah, thank you for those comments, those answers. Now, asking the question, what are the afford literary content across time? In our first episode, if you can still remember, we said that literature is not only an embodiment of mere stories and poems. It is actually a compendium of significant human experiences, a creative evolutionary diary that allows us to see how we humans matured in the course of time. These literary genres, according to technique and style, teach us that humans or human experiences may be conveyed in a variety of ways. We may choose to hide it in metaphors or in the person of characters whom we'd like others to learn from. Literary genres, according to content, on the other hand, enables us to tell the future generations of humans how we thrived in the challenging times of our milieu. Poems and stories posted on Facebook and other social media sites are not only mere posts, but literature written using the media and technology we have today. Media and technology introduced by, of course, the 21st century. I know that you have learned a lot in today's discussion, and I'd like to see you in our other sessions only here in Valenzuela Live for 21st Century Literature. Once again, this has been your live streaming teacher, Sir Jasper Angeles, bidding you a partial goodbye. See you next time and stay safe.